But these punk neighbors down the street, they would walk around in their army jackets with their patches and their combat boots. They were straight A students. And that's how they knew. And they had made this agreement in their clique. That's how they were going to keep people off their back. They were going to dress how they wanted, even though they were breaking school rules. They were going to put their hair how they wanted. But no teacher, no administrator said jack to them because they were straight A students, perfect attendance. That's punk. Welcome to Beyond Risk and Back. I have Jason Schreurs with me, and I've had him before on the podcast, brought him back because his book has just come out. And what I love so much about Jason and what I think he can support you with as parents is understanding not only mental health issues, but your child's love of music. Music that might, let's be clear, tick you off a little bit. Maybe the lyrics, maybe you don't understand them. Maybe you can't understand what that metal singer is saying, or maybe you don't like the language that hip hop artist is using. And maybe it's just too fast. And maybe as parents, and as a parent of a 27 and 28-year-old, I can say, maybe we're just too old. But this is why we brought Jason on to talk about scream therapy, which is the title of his new book. And I'm very excited. I'm very excited to have him back. I dig this guy a lot. We just got him back off of his book tour. Jason, welcome to Beyond Risk and Back. Glad to have you back, buddy.
You too, Aaron. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you again.
Anytime. And listeners, by the way, Jason's podcast is called Scream Therapy. I'm going to make sure he talks about that, talks about his new book coming out. And of course, we're going to talk about music, mental health, and the madness that teenagers are driving us to with their behavior and how it's all connected. So Jason, let's start right off for my first time listeners to you and who you are and what your show is all about. Bro, where'd you come from and what are you doing this for?
Well, I came from a small town and I came from a place of not knowing who the heck I was and why I felt so weird and why I didn't fit in. And I decided that I needed to find something that would appease this feeling inside of me. And I'm not sure if I stumbled upon it or whether I sought it out. It was in my early teens. And eventually I found punk rock. I was into metal. I was into thrash metal when I was younger. And then some guy turned me on to punk and he gave me a cassette tape. We were skateboarding. We were acting like delinquents. And he basically gave me this tape and it just opened my world right up. I mean, the lyrics in these songs and the heaviness and the fast and the feeling of just like letting loose was in these songs. And from there, I just continued to search this stuff out and it formed my identity. It made me the person who I was to be. And I think that without it, I would have been just another kid that was out there just being, disruptive and not having much of a direction. So this was my community that I found. It's my identity that I found. And it all came through this punk rock and metal.
It's weird because there's a dichotomous issue that comes up when you talk about, you would have been a delinquent, you found a community, punk music, metal music, hip hop, gangster rap, has a reputation of being the source of delinquency. So let's start right there. In your mind, is the music forming this rebellious nature? Is it encouraging it? Ozzy, Judas Priest, how many times metal musicians have been drug into courtrooms because Marilyn Manson, I've got my opinions about how many times he should be going to court from here forward. But, we always we as parents, we need to place something to blame for this behavior, disruptive behavior. And punk music is disruptive and it is destructive. So how come it didn't translate with you? Were you special or do you just think this is all BS?
The answer is no. I don't believe that the music creates, problematic behavior. It doesn't create people that are lashing out or, turning to drugs and alcohol or being destructive or being self-harming themselves or any of these things that I think a lot of young people struggle with. No, the music actually is an outlet for them. It's a way for them to express their emotions. It's a way for them to release these pent-up emotions inside of them around, not feeling like they fit in and trying to get into trouble or creating trouble because they don't know what else to do. And I think with any kind of creative outlet, it basically inspires people to look towards what they believe in and what they want to do in their lives. And, you said that it's destructive, and it is, but it's destructive in a positive way. So punk rock is all about reclaiming your identity and resisting, the status quo and rebelling against, the powers that be. These are all things that are being taught to these young people to further their lives. And I think the easy answer is to say, oh yeah, well, that guy listened to this punk rock and it was talking about, smashing the government. So now they're these, these delinquents, these kids that are causing trouble. And we need to have these outlets. Without them, we flounder. And I think for me, I lived in a small town and I just didn't have any kind of a way to express myself. And that was my way to basically, attach myself to something that I believe was positive. And I've become, the person I am today. And I didn't end up in jail. I didn't end up, on the streets. I was always a good role model for people. I was always a person that wanted to learn and support people. And that all came from punk rock.
I had these neighbors down the street, and they had very much into punk. And they had gotten me into it, Dead Kennedys, The Clash. And then, of course, later in life, I found Dropdead, whose music we're featuring on the show today. And I dig them so much. And it was during this time that heavy metal bridged into heavy metal. What we're dealing with is people who could have been delinquent. And then we start listening to a music that talks about delinquency as a power source, as a force to be used for good or for chaos. But on top of that, and I think this is one of the things that parents start to get concerned about it, and I'm interested in your thoughts. Then we've got people like Sid Vicious, where his drug use was rampant, his self-destructive behavior, his destroying of other people's property. We've got rappers who are not just glorifying a gangster lifestyle, but had been actively participating in it. We've got heavy metal musicians who the screaming and that out of control and that rampant rage that seemingly is contained within the concert suddenly ends up in these destructive, either towards the self or towards the band and then towards the fans, and what we lose when we lost Pantera, and what happened to us and the blame game that started. Are we still glorifying these musicians who may themselves be delinquent, and this source of community and pride and energy that we get from them, they're not taking seriously? Are these bad role models that we are supporting and financing and following?
I think some of them are. I think the problem is, how do you distinguish between something like Sid Vicious, who was, a nihilist and just completely self-harming and just seemed like no care, and also was a very awful musician, versus someone like Ian MacKaye of Fugazi. Fugazi is one of the most interesting musical bands of all time. Ian MacKaye has always been completely, a role model for so many people, and has always stuck to his morals and values, and has done a lot of great things for the world, not just within punk rock, but also within his community. So those are two different punk rockers, but really, in my mind, one's a punk and one's not a punk. And so the choice is very obvious. Listening to a band like Sex Pistols, who Sid Vicious was in, and, embracing that lifestyle is not, in my mind, punk rock. By the same token, you go to a metal show and people are moshing around to song lyrics that are very violent and glorify, chopping someone's head off. And really what you're there for is you're there for an emotional release. And when I fall down in the pit, I'm not getting stomped on by people. I'm being lifted back up. So I'm not going to comment on rap because I don't really feel like I can. But ultimately, this music is a way to cope. It can be very chaotic, but I think there's a very clear distinction to me between what bands are metal or punk and which ones aren't, even though they fall under that category by default. Marilyn Manson, we're not going to get into that whole thing, but a horrible human being, but they call him metal. Well, to me, metal is, bands like Exodus and Testament and Death Angel, who have these very strong, whether it's environmental messages or community messages. And so there's a huge distinction there. And I think what happens is people just group these bands together in a way that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't wash. And I think it's easy for parents to do that because they hear it and think, oh, I saw a thing on TV about this guy who killed himself, and oh, this is going to be the same as what my kid's listening to. It's not always the same.
And it's also so very frustrating and hard when you have something like Guar, who has always been a satirical, very prolific, making political points and religious points and confronting systems. And then
But spraying bodily fluids on the audience.
yeah, and of course the bodily fluids are fake and they're bright green. The shows are incredible. My ears hurt for days afterwards. And then someone says, well, it means God, what awful racket. And you can barely understand what's being said until you sit down and read the lyrics and you watch the commentary that's being made on stage. And then the lead singer dies of a heroin addiction that I come to find out he was dealing with in high school, as I have a friend. And it's frustrating to lose great voices to their own struggles. But I think, to your point, as parents, we dehumanize the individuals by trying to lump them into one type of music. This music's bad. If you've never read the lyrics, you can't say that. But then we're also trying to put these people, even through our distaste of them, up on a pedestal. My kid's listening to them and they're going to do what they do. And then we yank them down under accusations of being very, very human. Addiction is a very, very human thing. And we've lost great musicians to addiction. To say that Jim Morrison's addiction, but we lost such an incredible poet, but then not turn around and give that same credit to a metal musician. That's where I think we get lost. But the question still remains, Jason, how do you tell a parent who's saying, I can't stand my kid's music? What's your response? How do you train a parent who just doesn't want anything to do with the crap this kid's involved in to get involved with it? Were your parents involved?
To a certain extent. I mean, my stepdad and I built a skateboard ramp in my backyard. That was pretty sweet. The distinction there for me is, are your kids enjoying the music? Are they happy when they're listening to it? Do they feel like, does it seem like they're alive when they're listening to it? Are they becoming interested to the point where they might start playing music themselves? Are they using music when they're doing art, or are they listening to music when they're playing basketball in the backyard? Like, what is the music doing for them? Is it holding them up in their rooms to create satanic manifestos? Probably not. Ultimately, the music is an outlet for them. It can be a creative expression for them. It can accompany positive activities. You talk about this all the time on your show, but kids have a hard time these days becoming active, having interests in things because there's so much noise around them. And so if music is an interest, for instance, my son, my 15-year-old last year, he came over and he was a drummer. He wasn't a drummer. He liked to hit on the drums when he was younger, like when he was 8. And he had gotten away from that, and he was, quite depressed, and he had no direction, didn't have a lot of friends. He came over one day last year and I said, you used to be interested in playing the drums. Like, why don't you just, because I have a jam room downstairs, of course, because I've got punk bands down there. And why don't you go and, sit by the drums and play around a little bit? And, some little light kind of went off. And he said, okay, well, yeah, I will. But can you please go upstairs when I'm doing it? He's feeling shy. So I came upstairs and the whole house just shook for 20 minutes. And I'm like, oh, you still got it. So, in the coming months, he just kept doing it and doing it. And he's at the stage now, only a year later, where he could fully be in a thrash metal band. He's got all the blast beats and the double bass drums and all the things you need to be in a thrash metal band. And that's within a year. And it's completely changed his confidence, his identity. He's now into wearing all the black shirts and, he's growing like really long hair and wears a bandana and the whole works. But he's a completely different kid than he was mood-wise a year ago. And the music is what did that for him. Yes, he gets obsessive about it. He talks all about the different bands and he's become an encyclopedia on metal, which is cool. But he's got that interest. He's got that place to go. He feels like, he said to me, I feel like I have an identity now. And whereas before he just was lost. And so to me, if the kids are having a good time, if they're feeling like it's creating more confidence for them, if they feel like it's something that they're really interested in spending time, how can that be a bad thing when you've got just so much going on with kids these days where a lot of them aren't doing much?
You said something earlier about you and your stepdad skateboarding in a ramp in the backyard. The experience of seeing a meme where, this parent is looking at their kid playing video games on the couch and being upset and saying in the thought bubble, kids just need to go outside more. And then it shows a bunch of kids outside skateboarding, and that same parent is going, what are those hooligans doing? And it's like, they're skate. What do you mean? Like, what do you want? You want them to get involved in something. And I think the fear of the thing is so often bigger than the thing when it comes to music. We felt this about the Beatles. We felt this about Elvis. We felt this about, you just keep going. Kiss. Oh my, Knights in Satan's Service. Are you kidding? Have you ever been to a concert? It's ridiculous. And there's not a Kiss lyric I don't know. I worship the guys. And then I went to their concert, their first reunion concert. And for the first half, I was like, yeah. The second half was like, God, these guys suck. Like, these guys are terrible. And I knew every lyric. But I was with my army, and in a Pantera concert, and Sepultura, and, Prong, and on and on. If any parent took the time to find out their kid's favorite band and then went to Reddit and put r/the name of that band, you would meet the community. You could ask one question, hey, I'm a parent. What are the best and worst things about this band? And then read the comments. Like, you talked about your kiddo becoming obsessive. Thank God. Because the moment he starts to obsess about Meshuggah's drummer, his drumming's going to change. The moment he's not just listening to Slipknot, but actually listening to the drummer's technique and how he winds in with the music. You also said earlier, and I want to bring it up because it's confronting like with metal music. I can't understand what they're saying. You don't have to be good at music to play punk music. Like that's one of the old things we used to say is, oh my God, they suck so bad, but this is their 9th album, and when you really listen past the, I can't hear what's going on. If you keep listening, you'll hear it. And what is it about punk for you? Why did punk call you? Why not metal? You said you started with metal, ended with punk. Your book's about punk. Your podcast is about punk. What is it about punk?
There were some metal bands that I was listening to that had social issues such as environmentalist issues, issues around, government tyranny, things that are happening with our government. Well, I'm from Canada, but governments in general, going after other countries that were quote unquote weaker than they were. All these messages were in there. But when I found this punk rock, the messages became more the focus. For metal, I think the focus was, proficiency in the musicianship and the aggression and the heaviness. And for punk rock, it was, we've got this, we're going to pick up this instrument and we're going to plow ahead with these 4 chords, sometimes 3 chords, and just play, basic blazing rock and roll, with roots in blues as well. But we're going to scream, we're going to scream at authority figures. We're going to scream at our governments. We're going to scream at each other. We're going to scream within our community and make sure we're all taken care of. And so that's what really drew me to it. Also, I was looking for the hardest and the fastest and the loudest stuff I could. There was things in punk rock and hardcore that I had never heard before. There were singers in these genres that were completely out there with their screams, and I was trying to find something to block out a lot of the stuff that was going on in my head. I was undiagnosed bipolar for the first 46 years of my life. I needed something to help me cope. And when I was a kid, that's the direction I went, was let's find the fastest and the hardest and the loudest. I think ultimately punk became my genre of choice because when I met the people in the punk community, I saw who they were. I saw how they were, also feeling like weirdos and freaks and losers, and how they embraced that as an empowerment. And I think that was what really drew me to it, is I could walk into a punk show and immediately I was welcomed and accepted, and I was, involved, and I could be part of it. I could be in bands. I could help put on shows. And those are all things that were so immediate. I was used to being in a world where I had to just struggle and push all the time to fit in. And all of a sudden it was just like instant welcoming. And that really just, I was sold. I just couldn't go back from there. And I've been going to those shows ever since, whether it's in someone's basement or at a warehouse space that's been set up, on the sly because a lot of venues don't want to deal with these bands, or whether it's in actual venues. I mean, I've seen punk bands in stadiums for that matter. No, there was something different for me there, and it just clicked, and it was a container for me to feel like I could actually survive. I'm not saying literally in my case, it's more figuratively, but a lot of folks in the punk scene, that is their survival literally, and how many people have these bands met that said they wanted to kill themselves, but they heard the band's music and they were, it saved their lives literally. For me, it was more figurative. I feel like if I didn't find punk rock, I would have been living a life of misery or just unease or just unfulfilled. And I don't know that I would have done all the things I've done if it wasn't for punk rock.
At brabapp.com, parents, I have posted a parenting masterclass. Before you fast forward through this commercial, give me a chance because I'm going to keep it short. I'm going to keep it blunt. This is a Telly award-winning parenting masterclass. The content is everything I have ever taught a parent in the past 20 years of working with parents in crisis. There are 3 components to the course. 56 classes in 3 components. The red, the beyond risk, the crisis children. Yellow, the at-risk children. And green, when things are going well, how do we get them to go great or keep them going well? It's everything I've ever taught a parent in 20 years of working with families. But here's the deal. It's $99. I want every parent to be able to have access to this course. So please go to brabapp.com, B-R-A-B for Beyond Risk and Back. brabapp.com, B-R-A-B-A-P-P.com. Check it out for yourself. Having been diagnosed ADHD at a very young age, we talk about that thing that calls to us. For me, I had finally heard a sound that matched noise in my head. Like finally there was something moving at the same pace as my thoughts. And when I heard Sepultura and that low grind with that just raw screaming, it's just like somebody is doing out loud what's going on the inside. So now I want to use this and what you just said to bridge over into the mental health aspect, because your book is Scream Therapy. I want to understand with you and bipolar, me, ADHD and addiction, these things that we find. What's the correlation? How come your podcast, how do you keep tying these two things together? Your mental health or just mental health in general? Is it the mental health of the musicians? What's the tie over for you with punk and mental health?
What I didn't realize is that there are a lot of people in the mental health sector who are punk rockers and had grown up on punk and had used those ethics and morals they found in punk in order to go and help people. And they were helping people in ways that weren't traditional. They were finding ways of therapy that were not what you would consider the typical therapies. And so that aspect of the book and the podcast really tied into these folks that were in the punk scene who were dealing with their mental health issues and being empowered and really tackling them head on. And not a lot of the folks on my podcast are folks that are like in the thick of it. Some of them are, and the conversations were mutually beneficial for me and for them. But a lot of them have reached the, let's call it the healing parts of their journeys, the transformative parts of their journeys, where they feel like they're, becoming different people after having worked on themselves. And so to me, the connection is just that punk rock and mental health are symbiotic. They work together. You have to have that creative outlet and those things to help you in order to be well. If you're living life without a lot of direction and don't have things that you enjoy or that creatively inspire you, your mental health is going to be crap, but there's no way to really pull out of that. So me, it was like the idea that why did I find punk rock, or why did it find me? And why did I use it all those years as a way to cope? And when I couldn't cope anymore and I had my mental health crisis, how did it help me get back from that pile of rubble and bring back up to a place where I wanted to be? And that's where I feel like I am today, relatively speaking. And I believe that it was the punk scene and the people I met in the scene and going to the shows and listening to the music that was a huge part of my wellness plan, in addition to what you consider to be the normal stuff like medications and exercise and diet and sleep and all these things that I need to have. But without that creative aspect and that community aspect, I don't know what would have happened.
Would you ever interrupt your son's listening to a certain band or artist out of a fear, concern, or own personal feeling about this artist's value system that you feel would be counterproductive to the value system you're trying to impart on your son? Would you ever try to censor your son's musical listening?
No. What I would do is I would talk to him and I would explain to him that when I was 16, I listened to it and I didn't really understand the damaging nature of those lyrics, and, have a conversation. And kids are smart. Like, we all know this, this, kids are smart. They're going to understand when something's satirical or something is, problematic. And, a good example of there's this band called Stormtroopers of Death, SOD. And when I was a kid, the lyrics are pretty harsh and they are a satirical band, but for someone listening on the surface value, it'd be like, well, why are they're very racist? What's going on here? And I think what I grew to understand was that, yes, I would sing these lyrics because it was really shocking and I could piss people off. Ultimately, as I grew and as my mind kind of was opened up to these issues around sexism and homophobia and racism, I grew to understand that it was just it was dumb and there was some damaging value to it. But I didn't begrudge listening to it because it taught me that. And I think the same with him. He's listening to this band now and I'm like, dude, you know that this band is like, first of all, they're not serious. Like, when they say these things they're saying, they're not being serious. They're trying to joke around. But of course, they came out in 1985 and the jokes in 1985 are very, very different than they are today. And you can get away with a lot less today, thankfully. So we had that conversation and he just said, yeah, I know, they're just stupid. He says, I don't really like listening to them because those lyrics are kind of dumb. And I like to filter out the songs that aren't like that, because there are some songs in those albums that are really positive. And so he knows. And we had a conversation and, if there was something that he didn't quite understand how it was damaging or not cool, then I think we could have more of a conversation around it. And ultimately it's up to him. And I trust him. I don't think he's going to listen to stuff that's going to be, damaging to the world or sexist or like. He's my kid. Of course, he's going to know between good and bad, right and wrong.
I mean, there's a really funny picture I saw the other day that the metal band Slayer's been around for a long time, and they've all, back in the day when somebody would be wearing a Slayer t-shirt, but this was also during the time where, Tipper Gore was trying to get music banned and ratings on album covers, which, funny enough, ended up being the best thing you could ever do for heavy metal music is give it an R rating. It's twice as many albums sold, but when you see Slayer on a t-shirt, and that's what this picture was showing the average Slayer fan, and it showed someone with the white makeup and the black lipstick and the black eyeliner and, the deep, dark, long black hair, looking very much like, Finnish death metal fan, not a Slayer fan, but they said average Slayer fan. And here's this truly even almost a frightening image meant to provoke, fear and discomfort and everything. And then it said the lead singer of Slayer, and there's dude there wearing a SpongeBob t-shirt, and we don't know these people. And whether they're proselytizing something really, really good or saying something incredibly, incredibly dark, you don't know these people and you don't know which ones are faking it. Is goat whore faking it? Is cattle decapitation faking it? How will you find out? Before you tell your kid, I don't want you listening to the music. This is it, right? This is where, as metal, as punk, as rap listeners, this is where the divide is created. When someone passes that snap judgment on what was maybe a style of music. But as you said, Jason, it becomes our identity. It becomes our community. And all of a sudden the parents are saying, I don't like this music. Do you hear what you're actually telling the kid? Do you hear how deeply you have just separated yourself from your child? Do you know your child's favorite song? Can you Google the lyrics and see what's really being said? It could blow your mind. So again, with this, talk about the book. How far are you pushing this with the book? What are you looking for with your book to create? Who are you connecting, and what are you connecting them to with your book, Scream Therapy?
Well, I think I'm connecting people with people's lived experiences first and foremost. My story is maybe typical of a lot of people's story as far as mental health goes. Maybe not in a lot of aspects as well. I think that ultimately I'm trying to tell a story about how my life looked before I was diagnosed and how it's looked since then. I think it's also trying to dispel the idea that punk rock is, like we talked about, there's studies around loud and aggressive and violent, quote unquote, music and how that affects people. Does violent music make violent people? And the studies that I've read says no. It's actually a way of dealing with those violent thoughts, or especially around self-harm. Like, how do you deal with this internal turmoil within yourself when you don't have any way to deal with that? And so that's really what the book is about in one aspect. The other aspect of this, there's so much community within this punk scene, and that's what the book really is trying to show is, how do you find community in this world? And maybe the communities that you're looking at aren't necessarily the communities that are going to further your spiritual and physical and mental well-being. And I also think the book is very much about how do we move on with our mental health using maybe different ways of dealing with this. So, not even just like types of therapy. Like, I'm not saying use Scream Therapy and go into your room, and Art Janoff, who wrote the Primal Scream, used this idea of going into a room with a teddy bear and yelling at it and smashing the teddy bear. And to me, that's it's good, but it's also not very pointed, and there's no real outcome to that. And I think with punk rock, it basically allows people to find a place for themselves where they can be active in their mental health, and they can feel empowered. And so it's really a look at a different subculture that maybe people haven't thought about as being therapeutic. By that same token, it's reinforcing for folks that are part of the scene that this is a place that I can really do some work. I can really find a way to cope and heal and transform into the person I want to be. Under the umbrella of a really good creative nonfiction book with it's entertaining and it's a page turner. It's not a textbook or a boring, like a self-help book. It's very much a creative piece of work. And so, you can get a lot of things out of it. Ultimately, I just want people to pick it up and enjoy it in whatever way they can.
All right. This is the part where I ask about your favorite punk bands and why, but I want to add to that. All my parents who are listening, who are just like, okay, I get what you guys are saying and everything like that, but I also want to know the song, a particular song or a particular band that you would ask a parent to say, just listen to this song, stomach your way through it the first time, keep going, pull up the lyrics. How would you introduce? Because one of the, I'm thinking about this right now. It's like one of the coolest things is, the kid who just keeps rolling the eyes at the parent comes home. The parent's like, yo, have you ever listened to Dropdead? I've been listening to them all day. They're amazing. The kid's like, what? Like, who is this parent in this house? And suddenly you got a connection point, right? Like, what your favorite bands and why, but also where would you tell a parent to go first? What band, what artist, what song?
There's a lot of intelligence in punk rock, and I think that that's what's missing. I think a lot of parents assume that punk rock is just songs about smashing bottles and, wiping blood down someone's shirt or whatever. And that's not the case. And I think if a parent was to pick up an album by, let's just throw out the band that I love the most and has always been my favorite band since I heard them, a band called Fugazi from Washington, D.C., who are miles ahead of what was going on in the world. In 1993, they put out an album called In on the Kill Taker, and it talks about issues that we're talking about today. And they're very poetic in some ways. They're very pointed in some ways. And, they spent their whole careers only playing shows that were benefit shows for local charities. They spent their whole careers forgoing the idea of making money off their band in order to be in a creative space with their fans. So, that kind of a band, every song has its message. There's a song called Badmouth, but basically says that the more you talk bad about somebody, the more you're talking bad about yourself. Like, these are very basic messages. There's a song called Waiting Room, which is all about like taking charge of your life and not being complacent. And these are basic messages that are really inspiring. There's a band called Propaganda from Winnipeg, who the guy that writes the lyrics he's just an amazing genius about writing political lyrics and wordplay. And, these people are like highly, highly intelligent people, highly creative people that could just completely blow your mind if you read the lyrics, like you were saying. And, there's so many of them out there. There's people that are, it's like reading poetry for a lot of these bands. It's like reading political dissertation for a lot of these bands. So yeah, Fugazi, Propaganda are two of the big ones. It's very hard to name the ones that are, I could go on all day about different bands, but those are probably the two that really stand out.
Jello Biafra. He wrote a song for Sepultura called Biotech is Godzilla. And this is the thing, is it from the outside, what are you talking about? It's a history lesson of a horrible situation that took place that is a fact. And it's one of those things that if we all knew about it, wouldn't we do something about it? And I think that's the part that metal music and punk music, even rap music, they're confronting things that they think we should be doing something about. We tend to turn away from it. And I don't think an excuse of, well, if they would lower the volume of their voice, I would listen more. I don't believe that. And I believe shouting is what you do when two hearts are very, very far apart, because you don't feel like you're going to be heard. That's why we shout. That's why we yell. Jason, where can they get your book? Let's give them all your contact information. Make sure these parents can follow up with you.
Well, the easiest way to reach me is at my website, which is screamtherapyhq.com, as in headquarters. So screamtherapyhq.com. The book and the podcast are there, as well as some other stuff that I've been working on. You can get the book at your local bookstore. You can just request it and they'll find it for you and order it in. And yeah, it's one of those things that, it's out there. You do have to look a little bit more because I did self-publish it, but it's available. And I also have my podcast on all the different platforms. So whatever platform you listen to for your podcast, if you search Scream Therapy, you're going to find it.
Parents, make sure you follow up with Jason. Go to Amazon, get his book. This guy's got a ticket going, and I think you should ride with him. Check out his podcast, Scream Therapy, Jason Schreurs. And big thanks to Dropdead for literally, I reached out to them on Facebook through Messenger. I had met them years ago at LAX. I sent them the picture that I took with them and said, yo, I'm doing a podcast with Jason Schreurs. Can we use your music? And they wrote back and said, yes. Jason, I know how excited I was when I announced that back to you, and I just wrote you back, because the first thing that came to my mind when they said yes is I was like, that's so punk. There's no business in the way, no machine in the way. They just wrote back and they were like, oh yeah, sure. Please let us know when it's out and we'll promote it.
And there's a huge network of these bands. Dropdead are an amazing band and I've listened to them for a long time, but they're not an anomaly in that world. You can basically ask any punk band of any stripe for something and they're going to get back to you and be very open about helping you out. It's a very nurturing scene, and it's not just the fans, it's the whole, from the bands on down, labels on down. So I'm really glad that you met those guys there, at an airport, no less. And
at an airport where they just finished a show, and I was flying from an event I did, and I was sitting next to them. And I was like, I know these guys. Like, I know they're a punk or a metal band. I have no idea which one, but I could recognize them, but I don't remember names. So I immediately got on my phone and said, punk and metal concerts this past weekend, and Dropdead popped up. And I was like, holy crap. I've been listening to them for years. And I just stood up in the airport. I was like, are you guys Dropdead? And they're like, yeah. And it was, again, they were just so punk. And punk is not normal. Punk is not the norm. It's not supposed to be. Something outside of that norm is punk, and that's the purpose of it. It's non-judgmental. These are not the racist, sexist assholes. These are the people who've been promoting equality since the beginning. And that's what I wanted to say about my neighbors down the street who introduced me to the Ramones and Dead Kennedys and the Clash. And I took that stuff home, and London Calling echoed from my room for days on end as I was trying to understand what they were saying. The KKK took my baby away, and what that actually meant. And of course, it sounds satirical, but underneath there's a message. But these punk neighbors down the street, they would walk around in their army jackets with their patches and their combat boots, their big black combat boots or their Doc Martens. They were straight A students. And that's how they knew, and they had made this agreement in their clique. That's how they were going to keep people off their back. They were going to dress how they wanted, even though they were breaking school rules. They were going to put their hair how they wanted, but no teacher, no administrator said jack to them because they were straight A students, perfect attendance. That's punk. And that stayed with me, was that punk didn't mean you had to fill in the blank, dress a certain way, act a certain way. It said you step out of the norm and you hold that space with courage, because we got the music that's your anthem to back up what you're going to do, whatever you are, whoever you are. We got a punk song for you. We got a metal song for you. We got a rap song for you. That's what I love about this fringe music so much.
Amen to that.
As a big thank you to Dropdead, please also make sure you visit Dropdead HQ to see what they've got going on. So follow up Jason Schreurs at Scream Therapy HQ. Check out his podcast. Go get his book. Hit up Dropdead. And as always, please come back next week for another episode of Beyond Risk and Back. Let's listen to some Dropdead.